You already know its face, the antlers, the deer skull, the tall thing with the glowing eyes standing at the tree line. You've seen it in the games, the movies, tattooed on people's arms. I need to tell you something. That thing, with the antlers, the skull, somebody made that up, and recently. It's not the Wendigo. The real one doesn't have antlers. The real one is worse, because the real one used to be a person. A trapper, a father, somebody's neighbor. Somebody who got trapped by the snow, ran out of food and did the one thing a human is never supposed to do. And here's the part that should really get to you. The people who told this story for the first time, they weren't warning you about a creature in the woods. They were warning you about what you might become. The Wendigo isn't a monster with a home in the forest. It's a line. And every winter, in the cold and in the dark, and the hunger, real people crossed it. Let me show you where this legend actually comes from, and how we turned a horror this human into a guy with a deer skull for a head. Welcome to Exhumed Legends. The Wendigo doesn't come from a movie. It comes from the far north. For centuries, the Algonquian-speaking people have lived across the great cold forests that stretch from the Great Lakes up into the subarctic. Nations like the Ojibwe, who call themselves the Anishinaabe, the Cree, the Innu, the Soto, and others. Different nations, different languages, spread over an enormous territory of pine, snow, and frozen lakes. And almost everywhere in that territory, you find a version of the same terrible being. The name gets spelled a lot of ways. Wendigo, 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 and said a lot of ways too, but it points at the same idea wherever it's told. A spirit of winter, a spirit of hunger, a spirit of the one thing you must never do. This isn't a campfire monster somebody invented to sell tickets. It's a serious, old, and in many communities still living belief, tied directly to survival in one of the harshest places human beings have ever chosen to live. And to understand why it's so frightening, you have to understand the winters that made it. So picture the world it was born in. A single family, snowed into one small dwelling, 100 miles or more from anyone else. The nearest help is a frozen death away across the ice. The game has moved on or died off. The food they stored is gone, all gone bad. It is 40, 50 below, and it has been for weeks. There is no plane coming. There is no road. There is only the cold and the dark that lasts most of the day, and the hunger that starts in your stomach and then gets into your head. Famine wasn't a rare disaster up there. It was a regular visitor, a bad hunting season, an early freeze, a sickness that took hunters and a whole family could starve before spring. Everybody knew it. Everybody had lost people to it. And that is the world the Wendigo lives in. The legend takes that world and asks one unbearable question. When the food is gone and the snow won't stop, and the people you love are dying in front of you, what happens to a person? What the Wendigo really looks like. So let's kill the deer skull. We'll come back to where that came from, but let's get the real thing in front of you first. In the older, traditional descriptions, the Wendigo is horrifying in a much more human and more upsetting way. It's gaunt, starved down past thin, to the bone, skin stretched tight as grey as ash, pulled so hard over the skeleton that you can count every rib. Its eyes are sunk deep into their sockets, or in some tellings pushed back so far they look like a corpse's. The Ojibwe writer Basil Johnson, who described the being in real depth, painted it as something that reeked of death and corruption, decay and rot coming off it in waves. Its lips tattered and bloody because of what it had been eating. In many traditions, its heart is made of ice, actual ice. A frozen thing where a human heart should be. And in some versions, the only way to truly kill a Wendigo is to melt that heart or destroy it completely. You can't just kill the body, because the cold in it will keep coming back. But here is the detail that matters more than any of the rest. It is always, always starving. And that's the core of it. The Wendigo eats, and eats, and is never full, and in some tellings, it grows every single time it feeds, so the more it eats, the bigger it becomes, which means its hunger grows right along with it. It can never catch up to itself. It is doomed to be forever empty, no matter how much it takes. Sit with that, because that's not really a description of a monster. That's a description of an idea, and the idea is the whole point. The hunger that never ends. Here's what the Wendigo actually is, underneath the ice and the ribs. It's what happens to a person who puts their own survival above everyone else's. It's greed, given in a body. In the traditional understanding, the Wendigo is selfishness, taken all the way to its endpoint. The person who consumes and consumes, who hoards, who takes more than their fair share, who will, in the end, devour the people around them to keep themselves going. And look at how perfectly the punishment fits the crime. The more the Wendigo takes, the emptier it gets. It's cursed to be forever hungry, forever freezing, forever alone in the snow. That's not a random curse. That's a lesson carved into a monster and handed down for generations, in a place where one selfish person really could get an entire community killed. Because up there, survival was a group project. You shared the kill. You took in the family whose hunter died. You fed the guest before you fed yourself. That wasn't just good manners. That was the system that kept everyone alive through the winter. And the Wendigo was the shadow standing behind that system. Share, or you become the thing in the snow. Take too much, and you stop being human. To be called a Wendigo wasn't a joke. It was one of the heaviest accusations you could make about a person, that their hunger had turned them into a danger to everyone around them. The Wendigo was a warning, and like every warning that actually works, it was built to terrify. But here's where it stops being only a story and starts leaving marks in the real world. For generations, observers in the north wrote about something among some Algonquian communities that eventually got a clinical-sounding name: Wendigo Psychosis. The description went like this: a person would be seized by a growing, obsessive craving, a compulsion toward eating human flesh, paired with a deep, panicked terror that they themselves were turning into a Wendigo. And chillingly, this was said to happen even when other food was available. Now, I have to be honest with you, because the truth here is more interesting than a clean answer. Anthropologists have argued about Wendigo psychosis for decades, and they still don't agree. Some treated it as a genuine culture-bound condition, a specific kind of breakdown that could only happen inside a culture that already carried the Wendigo belief, triggered by the trauma of those famine winters. But others pushed back hard. One influential argument said that outsiders had barely misread what they were seeing, that the documented cases were fewer and murkier than the textbook claimed, that in a place where starvation was routine, communities sometimes had to make an unthinkable decision about a person who had begun to eat human flesh, or who they feared soon would, and that outside observers took those desperate, real-world killings and dressed them up as a mysterious psychosis. In other words, the monster might have been partly invented by the people writing it down. I'm not going to pretend that debate is settled, because it isn't. But strip all of it back, and you're left with something very human and very dark. In a place where hunger could genuinely take your mind, people lived with a real, named fear. The fear that starvation could turn them into a danger to the people they loved most. That the monster wasn't out in the trees at all. That it was a door inside them, one the winter could open. And sometimes that fear had a body count. The most infamous case is a Cree trapper remembered as Swift Runner. In the winter of 1878 into 1879, out on the land near what's now Fort Saskatchewan, in Alberta, Swift Runner's family died over the course of the season. And it was he who killed and ate them, his wife, his children, 6 people in all, by most accounts. And here's the detail that haunts everyone who reads it. He was only a day's travel or so from a Hudson Bay Company post. A place with food. He did not have to do it to survive. When it finally came out, Swift Runner said a Wendigo spirit had taken a hold of him, that something had gotten into him and driven him to it. The authorities didn't accept a spirit as a defense. He was tried, and in 1879, he was hanged. Reportedly, the men who dealt with him said he seemed less like a man who'd lost his mind to hunger, and more like a man who had simply crossed a line and couldn't come back. Then there are the Wendigo hunters, and this is where two whole world views crash into each other. In some communities, there were famous people whose grim responsibility was to deal with someone believed to be turning into a Wendigo. The most famous is an OG Cree man named Jack Fiddler, a chief and a healer in the Sandy Lake region. Over his lifetime, Jack Fiddler was said to have destroyed many Wendigos. By some tellings, around 14 of them. To his people, that didn't make him a killer. It made him a protector, a man standing between the community and something that, if it fully turned, would kill them all. In 1907, Jack Fiddler and his brother Joseph were arrested by the Canadian authorities for a killing. The death of a woman they said was in the grip of the transformation, becoming a Wendigo. To the Fiddlers, they had stopped a monster. To the Crown, they had committed murder. Two cultures, standing in the same room, unable to even agree on what had happened. Jack Fiddler took his own life before it went to trial. His brother was convicted. That collision, a protector to one people, a murderer to another, that's a Wendigo in real life, not a costume, a belief so real that people lived and died by it. So, if the real Wendigo is gaunt, starving, ice-hearted thing that used to be human, where on earth did the deer skull come from? Because that image, the antlers, the animal's skull, the elk-headed giant in the fog, is everywhere now. And it's new. The Wendigo first really crossed over into Western horror through a short story. In 1910, a writer named Algernon Blackwood published a tale simply called The Wendigo, about something vast and terrible out in the Canadian wilderness. It's a genuinely unsettling story, but notice what's not in it. No deer skull, no antlers. Blackwood's Wendigo is a thing of wind and wild spaces and luring men to their deaths, closer to the older spirit than the modern monster. The antlers came much later, over the last couple of decades, through video games, television, and a flood of online horror art. The Wendigo got redesigned. Somewhere in there, it fused with a completely different idea. The image of a deer or elk skull, of antlers, of a forest predator, and that new hybrid spread across the internet like wildfire. It's a fantastic looking monster. Artists love it. I get it. But it's a costume that got stapled into a much older, much sadder thing. And when you swap the starving man for the antlered beast, you lose the entire point. The deer skull turns the Wendigo into just another creature in the woods, something out there, something other. The real Wendigo was never out there. It was the person freezing next to you. It was you, if the winter got long enough. We took a story about the horror inside human beings, and we gave it antlers, so we wouldn't have to see ourselves in it. So, where does the legend actually come from? Not from a skull, not from antlers. It comes from the hardest truth there is. That survival can ask a person to stop being a person. That in a long enough winter, with a deep enough hunger, the line between human and monster is thinner than any of us want to believe. The people of the North didn't build the Wendigo to scare children. They built it to hold something too heavy, to say plainly, the reality of famine, the horror of the one taboo you cannot break, and the way desperation can hollow a human being from the inside until there's nothing left but hunger. They gave that terror a shape so they could name it and teach it and warn each other in the dark. And here's the part that should follow you out of this video. The Wendigo isn't only about starving in the snow. Some thinkers have taken the idea further, pointing out that the Wendigo is the perfect picture of any hunger that can never be satisfied. The person who has enough and takes more, the one who consumes and is somehow always empty, always cold, always needing the next thing. Greed that eats the world and calls it survival. Look at it this way, and the Wendigo stops being a creature from a faraway winter. It starts looking like a mirror. And if you enjoyed this one, hit like and subscribe, because next I'm digging up another legend everyone thinks they know, and the real story is nothing like the monster you've been sold. This channel is where we exhume, where the legends actually came from. So, is the Wendigo real? Here's my verdict. The antlered thing at the tree line? No, that one we made up recently. For horror art and video games, it's a great monster. It's not the Wendigo. But the Wendigo underneath it, the real one, is as real as it gets. It's famine. It's the cannibalism taboo that kept whole communities alive through winters we can barely imagine. It's Swift Runner, a day from a warm meal, doing the unthinkable and blaming a spirit because the alternative, that a man could just choose it, was somehow more frightening than a monster. The Wendigo was never really about a thing in the woods. It's about the thing inside. The endless hunger for food, for more, for whatever's never quite enough. And the exact moment you let it take the wheel, that's why it lasted. That's why it still works on you. Because some quiet part of you knows it's asking a fair question. If it were you, snowed in, starving, your family dying around you, how sure are you, really, about where your line is? You're not afraid of meeting a Wendigo. You're afraid of becoming one. And I meant that question a second ago. Don't just sit with it. If it were you, snowed in and starving, your family slipping away one by one, do you actually know where your line is? Not that you'd hope you'd do, what you'd really do. Tell me down in the comments. I read them all. I'm already digging up the next one. So subscribe and you'll be here when it surfaces. This is Exhumed Legends, and some things don't stay buried.